Washington lands a 4-star in-state recruit on signing day.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes for Inside the Huskies at Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. So speaking of getting started, Lars, let's do this thing. So today, on Wednesday, as we're recording this on signing day, Washington has signed the majority of their class. Rahshawn Clark, 4-star DB from Garfield High, as you and I have kind of alluded to on this show, we expect him to commits to Washington today on Wednesday. And so he's a fantastic player. We're going to get really far into this. And just a housekeeping note, just for as the show goes along, Jedd Fisch alluded to 5 or 6 players that he said, I can't talk about yet. One of them was Rahshawn Clark because he hadn't announced his commitment or signed by the time that we spoke to him today, or around 12 o'clock or so. So now that he has committed, that's another one. And he did sign his financial aid agreement. So that's another one. There are going to be a whole lot of other guys that we discuss over the course of this show. If any commit between, it's 4:30 right now. And when we release this show on Thursday at 7 a.m., we're going to try to do our best to talk about all those guys. But with that being said, let's start with Rahshawn Clark, because this is a huge acquisition for Jedd Fisch, Steve Belichick, John Richardson, everybody.
Yeah, this is kind of one of those, it's a big picture, small picture, right? Big picture, right. When you're talking about the importance of recruiting, the importance of in-state recruiting, Jedd Fisch mentioned during his introductory press conference that within the next couple of weeks, he's going to invite a number of, and I'm assuming probably just puts this out to all the high school coaches, or at least a good majority of them across the state, and just say, hey, if anybody wants to make this from your staff, we're hosting. And that's the point. He's making all this, he's building inroads in the in-state recruiting. And what better way than to lead into that by putting proof to the pudding, by saying, hey, we actually signed this guy out of Arizona when we were at Arizona, or out of Washington when we were at Arizona, stuck with him, wanted him to stay home. He decided, hey, you know what? All these guys, I built a strong relationship. So it kind of validates what Jedd's going to say, where, hey, I do care about the state of Washington, so much so that I cared about it more than the last staff did. Because how many were going to be signing with Washington from this past class for Kalen DeBoer?
Nobody.
Right? Exactly.
Right.
So, and there, they had offered Rahshawn Clark, UW did, but again, there was kind of a few different reasons why that kind of never really materialized in terms of legitimate interest, mainly because of how the staff, where they wanted him to play, kind of how they envisioned him playing at Washington, somewhat of what Clark wanted to do. And so it just wasn't a good fit for the last staff. But again, that builds credence to what Jedd Fisch is saying. Hey, I'm asking you guys to invest in our program. I'm asking you to build a relationship with me. And I'm not doing it as a used car salesman by just never recruiting this area and never doing, not taking anybody from the state. They've got a number of guys from Arizona, either former Washington players or players from the state of Washington. So it's really good to kind of validate, a good 4-star kid that's going to play defensive back. Could honestly probably play cornerback, but maybe he could play some safety.
I think he'll fit better at safety.
But regardless, a guy that you just want to keep in the staff, in the state, almost not to the level of Budda Baker, right? When Chris Peterson took over, sure. and you're able to get a top 100 player in Budda Baker. Rahshawn's kind of in that second 4-star tier, where he's still a very elite player, but there's a bit of gap between him and what Budda Baker was coming out as. But it's getting those type of players where, hey, we already know the talent and productivity, and we've said we're going to play young freshmen. Let's start from in-state. We can only get one. We can't flip anybody else, but let's at least get one. And I think that's a good starting place for Jedd Fisch.
No, absolutely. And the fact that he was committed to him at Arizona definitely helps things as well. But let's go through that whole process real quick, because Brandon Huffman, shout out to him, did a good job of kind of breaking down the situation a little bit on the 247 Sports live show following his commitment, where what happened was Rahshawn wanted to play wide receiver. He was very set on that. Washington said, we really like you, but we want you to play safety. And it didn't seem like he was very willing to do that. And that's very early on in the process, right? This is April, May, June. And of course, you look at Washington's offense under Kalen DeBoer, and who doesn't want to play for Jamarcus Shepard, right? So you look at those factors and you say, okay, yeah, that's understandable. And so Rahshawn decided to look elsewhere early on, decided to commit to Cal, where it seemed like he was going to have an opportunity to play on both sides of the ball. And, as he continued, his stock definitely rose a little bit over his senior year. He got that 4th star from 247. And then really late in the process, John Richardson said, hey, we really like you too down in Arizona. As they gained steam over the course of the year, that relationship definitely blossomed rather quickly, takes an official visit down there, ends up committing and signing in December before opting out of his NLI and then coming up here. But as you said, this is just an athlete that, no matter where he's from, he's somebody you want on your team because he's a really impressive athlete. He's definitely going to have an opportunity to play at either corner or safety, but as you and I both alluded to, seems like he'd fit better at safety with his speed, his ball skills. Might even be able to move down in the nickel, as Ben Glassmeyer wrote over on Huskies Wire, that there are a lot of different ways to use this guy, and it's just a matter of what's going to work best. Now with Vinny Sunseri in the room to help coach at safety, and he's also, as you said, going to have that opportunity to play early. Because let's look at the safety room, where there's Cam Fabikilanen, and there's Mikel Esteen, and then what is it, right? The redshirt freshmen are Vincent Holmes and Diesel Gordon, where we like those guys. We haven't seen them do much on the field just yet because we haven't seen them get a lot of snaps. So they could be something. And then let's look at the true freshmen, because there are a whole lot of true freshmen behind them too. There's Peyton Waters, there's Paul Menke, there's Raheem Wright, and now there's Rahshawn Clark. That's a really promising room. That's really exciting. There's 3 4-stars in that group. 4, because Menke, Waters, Holmes, and Clark, where they've all been rated as 4-star on one side or another. So having those guys in the room is all really nice. And now it's like we've talked about with the edge rushers room, where it's all right, let's just see what happens. Let's see who wins out. And I wouldn't be surprised if all of those guys got, I don't want to say significant game time this year, but they all get some. And you just kind of see what happens with each of those guys and who might stand out.
Yeah, and I think, the interesting thing that kind of comes to mind as you were talking through that is once this April, May transfer portal window opens again, when the entire country's pregame and free agency really opens up, part of me wonders, Cam Fabikilanen, pretty safe bet to kind of be penciled in as a starter.
Yeah.
Mikel Esteen has been a spot starter, to use a pitching analogy, kind of like the bullpen day, right? Where you can go 4 or 5 innings with a relief pitcher, or maybe 3 innings with a relief pitcher. And Mikel certainly has played pretty well. He's had a couple of interceptions when he's been called upon, so he hasn't been bad in any stretch, but it's almost like, okay, well, what kind of prevented him from breaking through, right? So the reason why I'm saying this is you have a bunch of young talent that you just mentioned, but then that upper class part, like that's kind of what's missing there. So part of me wonders, could they still take a safety in that spring window, which I honestly think they would. It would maybe be like a 1-year guy, right? Kind of like a Brian Parham. There's a potential, right? Because what happens if Cam Fabikilanen gets hurt and maybe some of the other guys don't pick up the defensive scheme quickly, and I'm just saying, that's so. But it's a good position to be. The reason why I'm saying it's a good position to be in long term for Jedd Fisch.
No, I agree. I disagree that they're going to pick somebody up though, and it goes back to the points that he's made over the following weeks, where he said, "I'm okay with these guys making mistakes because I understand that they're freshmen." And that's the nice thing about bringing some of these high-level NFL coaches in, where it's, okay, we know we're going to work with you. And one thing that he preached today was the fundamentals. It's, we're going to make sure we work on setting the edge up front. We're going to make sure we work on tackling, all these sorts of things. We're having a guy like Vinny Sunseri coach the safeties. It's, okay, this is a former high-level recruit that played at Alabama and won national championships in Alabama, and a guy who played in the NFL for 3-4 years. So having those kinds of guys in the room is very, very helpful to work with guys of this level of potential. So, Lars, with that being said, let's talk about some of these other guys who Jedd Fisch alluded to. We'll give you the list of who we expect them to be, and we'll go from there. right after we send a good message to our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. I've always been a big fan of the food on Super Bowl Sunday personally. I like to cook a little bit, buffalo chicken dip. I might try that. Sausage rolls. It'd be a lot of fun. And with that being said, FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3, because I consider my cooking a W too. So I'm going to throw that one in there as a 4th, depending on what the dish is, of course. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And when we talk recruiting, we got to talk about our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. And with 2.5 million small businesses using LinkedIn for hiring, there's so many different people out there that you should definitely be a part of. And you can get started by posting your job for free at linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockdowncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So Lars, we have a list of all the guys because Jedd Fisch, one thing that he said was that there were 5 or 6 guys that he had in his notes that he couldn't talk about because they hadn't officially signed their letters of intent. We knew that Rahshawn Clark was one. Another guy that we discussed before the show that is the only other member that hasn't been announced on social media or anything as we record this that has committed to Washington but hasn't officially signed his financial aid agreement would be wide receiver Audric Harris. So that still leaves 3 or 4 spots open for other guys. And when we get down to, just what we've seen over the past couple of weeks, there are 4 guys that stand out. One is cornerback Tacario Davis, the all Pac-12 second teamer from Arizona. There's the running back Rashad Amos. There's edge rusher Isaiah Ward and
Russell Davis.
Oh, yeah. Oh, he signed. Russell Davis signed.
Okay.
So, and Russell Davis was the last one. So Russell Davis signed since then. So that's the last guy. But looking at the other guys who were out there after Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt decided to commit to Arizona, which isn't necessarily surprising. We did think that he was a Washington lean. And then you kind of look at the 2 rooms where we wouldn't be surprised that this dude in his last year wants to go do that, where Rashad Amos, on the other hand, has 2 years of eligibility. So he might be okay at taking a backseat for 1 year and then really taking over the job in 2025. Again, we'll see how that works out. But is there any one guy on that list that really stands out to you just on either side, where it's maybe somebody who hasn't committed yet or one of the guys that has?
So I got a couple. I'm going to start with Tacario Davis because for a couple of reasons. One, because of the 2 other signees / commits that he did confirm. Aficius Prysock, who played at Arizona last past season, and Jordan Shaw, who played at Indiana, transferred to Arizona in December, I believe, and then signed and enrolled and had to do all that. Anyways, is now coming to play at Washington. When you look at the cornerback room, Thaddeus Dixon confirmed that he's coming back, I believe. So, Devon Banks for sure is coming back. No doubt about that. Elijah Jackson, Jedd Fisch mentioned during his press conference, he was asked, who are some of the players, or have players kind of come to you and been like, how do I help recruit, or do I do any recruiting, any sort of thing like that? He mentioned Carson Bruner, and he mentioned Elijah Jackson second. Now, again, he's like, I'm missing some guys, and it's not like those are the only 5 guys that came to his office. But just the fact that EJ was one of the ones that kind of came to the top of mind when you start to look at the cornerback room, again, you want depth, right? You got a bunch of young guys at that position. But then if you're bringing in Tacario Davis and Prysock and Shaw, and then Devon Banks when we saw him before he got hurt last season, looked like he was going to be pretty promising, right? Elijah Jackson obviously made the big play in the Sugar Bowl to send UW to the national championship game. So now it becomes, okay, who's getting pushed out or who's getting less time? With them mentioning, and again, it's a good problem to have, right? Because in theory, you want the competition to sort it out. But then if you're telling all these, you just signed 3 or 4 redshirt freshmen, like, hey guys, you're going to get playing time, but it's still going to be a little bit. And then, next year, then you'll get your real year. And so I guess that could work out, right? But to me, the reason why I mentioned Dacario Davis is because Elijah Jackson would slot back at cornerback 1, theoretically, if you're just starting the defense and then starting to add, Prysock and those guys in. Davis would be that cornerback 1. Does then Jackson go to 2 and somebody goes to nickel? How do you kind of make that work? And if Elijah Jackson is putting in the time and effort with Jedd Fisch, how much of Davis still not necessarily lands? Because to our point that we mentioned on the show, he went in with a no contact designation, right? So that means I already know where I'm going. I'm just got to figure out when and how. And part of me wonders, okay, what's the holdup? Like, and part of it has to be logistically numbers in that regard.
So I've got 2 things for you on that point. The first one is something very interesting that Jedd Fisch said during his press conference, which is it's definitely an obvious statement, but sometimes it still needs to be said, which is if a talented player wants to come to your program, you figure it out and you worry about the numbers later. Look at Oregon. They have 92 scholarships on their roster right now. You figure it out later. Because you can't do that. So there's going to be a way for them to figure that out. So if Dacario Davis wants to come in, awesome. You find a way to make it work. I think that's something that Ben Glassmeyer pointed out over on Huskies Wire as well, in an article he wrote about Dacario, is if this does happen, it's very easy for you to slide Devon Banks inside. And you talked about Jordan Shaw, right? Jordan Shaw can easily take a year to develop, which is felt like what he was going to do at Arizona anyways. And he also was somebody that was talked about in playing the nickel, where let's look at the secondary right now. We just talked about it with the safeties at cornerback as well. If you, let's say in this hypothetical scenario, Dacario does commit to Washington. You have Prysock and Davis on the outside. You can put Devon Banks, who, as you said, is very impressive before he went down with a shoulder injury. You can put him in the nickel, and then behind those guys on the outside, you still have awesome length and athleticism in Elijah Jackson and Thaddeus Dixon. Is that kind of a bummer for especially a guy like Elijah who started a lot last year? Yeah, absolutely. But that's also if that happens, that could also be a very veteran move of, hey, I understand what we're trying to do here. I'm very willing to take any role on that I can to help this team. And just from the comments that Jedd Fisch made about him as one of the leaders who came to talk to him throughout this process, I feel like that's something he might be able to do. So that would also just give Washington a really impressive defensive backs room where there's a lot of youth, but having those 2 and Davis and Prysock as the anchors of it, that's really good.
Well, because the reason why I bring that up is because we've seen under the past regime where, especially in 22, how decimated injuries can be, right? And again, we don't root for injuries, but smart coaches plan for, 3 and 4 potential guys being needed. So it would be a perfect scenario. And again, this gets back to the people that Jedd Fisch has brought in. I think Elijah Jackson looked at John Richardson after what he's been coached with the past couple of years and was like, Jimmy Lake, back in a way, right? Where he's like, hey, like a guy that actually coaches, cares, knows, develops, gives young guys an opportunity to grow. I think that also kind of plays a role where, hey, I'm willing to take this backseat if it makes the team better and I don't truly suffer. Like, I'm not going to see he's going to get a decent amount of snaps is what I'm trying to say. Because I think, we saw Jabbar rotate a lot. So you would imagine that even with Dacario and Prysock, that Thaddeus and Elijah will get a decent amount of run. So again, it's just a matter of as long as you can maintain the roster, and that gets back to Jedd Fisch and players wanting to play for him. So I'm just throwing this out there as maybe that's what's holding the Davis one up, because otherwise, as we just mentioned, that's beautiful right there.
Right. And it's a nice thing when you look at somebody like, so Russell Davis did sign, and then Isaiah Ward, if he were to commit as well, or I was talking with our good buddy Christian Capel, friend of the pod, after the press conference, and we were talking about Steve Belichick's scheme. And one thing that we mentioned is a lot of these outside linebacker edge style guys that they have, are perfect for kind of what the Patriots were doing in New England, where I kept just bringing up Matthew Judon and how important he was. And that's kind of the Zach Durfee role, where he can play standing up. He can play with his hand in the dirt. He can do a whole lot of different things. And then, the one thing they don't have is somebody who the Patriots drafted in the second round last year, Georgia Tech edge rusher Keon White, where he's more of that, he can fit in a 3-4, he can fit in a 4-3 as just a true defensive end style, where he can set the edge, he can rush the passer a little bit. But then behind them, they had a whole bunch of just rotational edge rushers who can get after the passer really well. They had Josh Uche, they had Chase Winovich, they had Dietrich Wise, who played inside and out, where maybe that's a Voit Tanufi style role. They're very different body types, but there are a whole lot of different ways to make it work up front. And Isaiah Ward doesn't necessarily fit that Keon White role, but that's just another guy who, if you bring in, you figure it out later. Like maybe Maurice Himes takes a jump, where he's got that body type to be a true, 4-3 out, just set the edge kind of defender that can also get after the quarterback. But that was something that we were really curious about. And we're going to continue with all this talk because Jedd Fisch also had some really interesting comments about NIL and, one of my favorite coaches of all time as well. Right after we send a message to our good friends over at Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And right now, all users get $100 off when they buy a big game ticket with code VEGAS100 with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. It's so easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area, and Game Time offers all kinds of protections, including their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, and so much more. Game Time is obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. You can find exclusive flash deals and sponsor deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. With zone deals, you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for big time savings. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. And right now, all Game Time users get $100 off a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. Terms apply. Just download the Game Time app and use code VEGAS100 for $100 off a big game ticket. Or if you're not going to the game, use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So, Lars, let's start on the NIL front, because Jedd Fisch had some very interesting comments where he just shouted out every big time business, billionaire, everybody.
Operation.
Yeah, everything.
Everybody that's got a B next to it or a couple, 3 M's next to it, you got to mention from Jedd Fisch today.
Yeah, Fortune 500, where, there were rumors that he was at the LA Clippers game to go see Steve Ballmer, where, he got to mention Costco, Starbucks, REI, Amazon. Everybody got to mention. One of his great comments was, I hope to walk on, Starbucks field at Amazon Arena. All just did that where, there are a lot of ways you can take that comment. I'm sure Alaska Airlines might not have been too happy about that. So, if you don't see those comments anywhere, that might be why. But it's something that he said, and it's very, very interesting, because it's just a very, accepting way of thinking about NIL, because it is important. And then, of course, he follows it up with, but NFL is more important than NIL, and that's what we're selling. But please, Lars, you have a point.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's maybe Jedd Fisch is a very astute person.
Yeah.
He likes to tighten the bolts down, so maybe that's why he didn't mention Alaska Airlines. But beside the point, that it's the point of, Jedd Fisch mentioning NIL. Troy Dannon mentioned it, the 80 at his press conference. Jedd acknowledged it during his opening press conference, where he said, NIL it's a factor, right? But I think Washington will never truly get in the position, and I think it's important. We talked about this before the show. I mentioned it, where Florida, Tennessee, I don't know about Florida State per se, but there's a number of schools that the NCAA is starting to go after based on high school recruiting NIL violations. And basically the whole point of what you're getting at is, when you're announcing guys and how NIL plays a role in your program, it's, okay, are you dropping $3, $4, $5 million on a freshman quarterback, or are you dropping $3, $4, $5 million on a transfer quarterback? Those are two different discussions, because when you're in high school, it's like, okay, well, the 17-year-old kids, you're paying them under the table, that sort of thing. If you're in college already, you got a business. I think it's a little different story. So I do think it was a tightrope that Jedd walked, but he walked it correctly, where he basically focused more on the names and the people, acknowledged the UW collectives as well that are playing a role in this. And I think it's just a matter of he knows the resources that are there. He's not hyping up to say, hey, please come and help us. It's, hey, I mean, nobody's mentioned REI. Jimmy Lake didn't, Kalen didn't. And I'm like, when I heard REI, I'm like, my man, I mean, I'm a Columbia North Face guy, but REI is right up there. I mean, local and dear and close to the heart. So it's like he had that mountain man look. So maybe, I don't know, maybe simply Seattle and REI were going to partner up to get some like Jedd Fisch outer apparel wear. Who knows? But like, fun. You know, but I do think it's Jedd Fisch kind of just, it's a day and age of college football, right? You have to acknowledge NIL. It is what it is. But I do think, you know, when you look at the class that Washington got, there wasn't an Oregon sense of like, oh, hey, we got this guy because of NIL. They got, you know, Damon Williams not because of NIL. Like, whether he has an NIL deal or not, it's about the relationship that Jedd developed and the players that he wanted. They didn't just go and say, hey, we're going to throw some money at Alabama's players because we can get them and be spiteful. It's like, no, we're going to go get our guys because we know who we want and we know how to spend and we clearly have the resources to spend.
Right. So from that, because I know there are a lot of people that, you know, have a whole bunch of different thoughts about NIL, which is okay. That's fine. You're allowed to feel however you want to feel. But in this day and age of college football, there's a certain point where most have to just get on board with it because this is the way it's going. But then he followed that up with, as I said, he said, we sell the NFL, not NIL. And he said, a lot of programs can sell it. We're going to actually give it to you. Where Washington's social media team called, after the Steve Belichick hire, said the 33rd NFL team. And there are a whole lot of different ways you can take that. And then he follows that comment up with, you know, 2 of the 4 members of the coaching Mount Rushmore are going to be in the building and around the program. And me as a New England Patriots fan said, I'm sorry. What was that? Are you saying that Bill Belichick is going to be around Mott Lake every once in a while? Because I personally, yeah. I'm just going to go off on a tangent there.
No, but you're not really a tangent because it's actually a pretty valid point. And this is what we talked about with Kalen DeBoer. I'm going to tie this also where we actually can be serious about this, because what Nick Saban built at Alabama when he would bring in Charlie Strong as an analyst, as a former college head coach, as a $40,000, $50,000 a year analyst to live in Tuscaloosa and work for Nick Saban, right? Be around Jedd Fisch, be around these marquee names. So my curious part will be if they're even able to be in just an official capacity. But hey, he's just an analyst. Pete Carroll is an analyst. Bill Belichick is an analyst. Like, why is he doing that? It's like, well, go to college. And again, when you're an analyst, you're not necessarily doing recruiting. You're evaluating college players on other teams and evaluating your team and kind of doing a number of different things. Whereas it's not just like Bill Belichick's not going to make recruiting calls. Pete Carroll won't make recruiting calls. But if you're a recruit visiting on campus and Bill Belichick and Pete Carroll are breaking down film of the practices from spring ball in May or June, you're not intrigued by that? Like, because again, those guys are also the ones that are on the sideline. Like, for example, Tyler Schmidt is the name.
I doubt that we're going to see either of those guys on the sideline. I kind of want to get out in front of that one.
Yeah.
But
my point is just being around the program, because he mentioned walking the halls, and I think that was the point. Is that was like, just if you're walking around on campus, and it won't be every day, right? But again, there's the potential for that. We've even seen Pete Carroll take a photo of Milton Hopkins. So at least Pete Carroll, maybe not Bill Belichick, because maybe Bill is too good for that. But Pete Carroll certainly, because he's a local guy, he's already in Seattle. I can see him certainly being around the program. Where maybe again, to your point, right? They're not going to be on the sideline, but just being around the program in a legitimate capacity is significant, right? I mean, again, you could almost make the case, and I know we're a Washington show, but Nick Saban taking the job at ESPN as an analyst while supposedly still having an office at Bryant-Denny Stadium. It's like, hey, well, if you want those guys around, right? Even if they're doing other things. If Pete Carroll is serving as not a counselor, but like a
he's just kind of doing whatever he wants.
Right. He's kind of helping out the Seahawks. Right. I mean, that's the thing. It's like they're old enough to where they can do whatever they want. Right. So I doubt that Bill and those guys are truly going to be breaking down tape. But at any point, if Bill Belichick wants to come speak to the team after practice, are you not listening? I absolutely listening. And I think that No, but I think that is more or less what I would expect when Jedd Fisch mentions, the half of Mount Rushmore for football coaches being around.
So I agree. I agree with everything you just said with all that. I'm just very intrigued as to what the capacity is going to be, because if, you're going to slide some money their way to just say, all right, we're okay, Bill Belichick, you're not doing anything this year. You want to come out here, just come to the building once a week, help us out with this, answer some questions, work with your son. And the same thing for Pete Carroll, where I don't think that's too bad of a gig for either of them, where they're not doing much else. And that's the only reason we can sit here and talk about this. Like, if they were still coaching the Seahawks and Patriots, we're not having this discussion where it's, oh, cool. Wow. Like, look at this. Pete Carroll's coming to talk to the team. That's awesome. Bill Belichick just so happened to be in the area scouting because, the Patriots have the 3rd overall pick. That's really cool. Maybe he's going to hang out and talk to the guys, but because they're not doing anything else, it's easy enough to have this discussion and just say, okay, maybe this finds a way to work. And, not just with the connection of both their sons being on staff, the fact that Jedd Fisch has worked with both of these guys too is something legitimate there, where I don't think that, Steve Belichick and Vinny Sunseri are coming to Montlake if, they don't have this relationship in New England.
Exactly. And I think that's how it ties all together, is in some capacity, they have all worked together, whether Jedd was the quarterback's coach. I mean, Jedd mentioned Tom Brady during his press conference, where it's like, hey, you can be that kind of quarterback, or you can be Patrick Mahomes, right? And so he coached in the league since Patrick Mahomes has been in the league.
Yeah, he coached with the 2020 Patriots. And he was with the Rams before then too, because he referenced a lot with his time with the Rams and their passing attack. Because the comment he made because he didn't just obviously he didn't randomly bring either of those guys up. Because I believe it was you who asked the question about the style of quarterbacks and just what he was looking for. And he said, yeah, when you look at who the best quarterback in the league is now, it's somebody who can make off-structure plays look really pretty, while the last guy made in-structure plays look really pretty, and went into his analysis of Brady and Mahomes and everything, which was really cool, where he didn't work with either of those guys, but he talked about his time with the Rams and what that looked like working with Jared Goff, because it's that same in-structure style, where Jared Goff isn't necessarily a guy who looks very natural and very fluid out of structure. And you could see that, and that was one of the reasons the Rams weren't able to win a Super Bowl with him. So it's nice to just kind of see just some of those things that he's learned and how he's putting into action, because he did that when talking about Damon Williams. And just saying, yeah, that's something that he does really well, is he makes these off-structure throws and these plays look really, really nice.
Exactly. And so that's why I asked the question, because it validates even more, hey, yeah. I'm not just, because we heard a former coach mention, hey, I have NFL ties, I have this, I coach in the NFL. It's like, that's great. But how you use your experience is what actually matters in the present day, not just, hey, this guy, I've coached this guy, that guy. That's great. What are you still doing for me today and tomorrow? Because I'm playing for you for the next 4 years. I'm not playing for you last 10 years ago.
No, you've got a great point there, and I feel like that's a great place for us to just kind of wrap this one up for the day. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. And if you like the content that we got coming your way, please feel free to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. Please make sure you leave a like on the video. Leave us a comment down below. If you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review. It all really does help the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Friday.